Hi again everyone, welcome to week 2. I'm glad you made it through week 1 and I hope you had a chance to follow up on all those links and activities that we had embedded in the lecture slides from last week. This week we're looking more at dealing with diversity in the classroom and a range of mathematics learning styles. But one of the reasons this is important is historically maths education has sort of been focused straight down the middle, and we teach the content, and the students, whether they're behind, ahead or at the same place, just need to keep up with us. And that means that some kids end up being bored, some kids get lost, and some kids are chugging along okay. Clearly this is not acceptable, and we need to find ways to deal with diverse classes. And the answer to that is not just to have a streamed class, which is what we would have done in the old days. The truth being, even if you've got a streamed class, there's still a great deal of diversity in the class. And that diversity is not just about mathematical ability, but interests and learning styles and what they think is important and how they like to engage in mathematics. So hang in, hopefully get some good theoretically based but really practical ideas here. And again, these things will be picked up by your tutors during the week. You're really fortunate to have great tutors who have good practical ideas and wisdom to share with you. So the first thing I want to look at is theory, and sometimes when we say theory, people go, oh, what's that got to do with it? Well, there should be nothing more practical than a good theory. A theory is a way of justifying and giving a foundation for what you're doing. You're in a profession, when you go out and teach in classes, you can't just do, oh, I thought this was a good idea. There needs to be a reason why you think it works and what's a good idea, so you can justify what you're doing. So don't just switch off about theory thinking it's boring and dry stuff. It should help you do a good practical job of your class as well. So the first thing is, and this is not theory, but we are obliged to teach all students, despite whatever their abilities are, whether they have learning difficulties, what their interests are, where they come from, all sorts of variables. Because in any class, there is a huge diversity. There's a huge diversity. Even if you think the group is quite homogenous, there will be diversity around a whole range of things. So as teachers, this is our obligation. And often what we find in classes is people deal with a diverse student body really well in a range of subjects, but in mathematics we just teach them all the same. So it's important to make sure we provide opportunities for all of them. And there's lots of ways we can do that. Not the least being is having a variety of approaches. Now in primary schools, there's lots of ways we develop our learning and teaching, but some of the most common ones you'll see are based on 3 theories or theoretical ideas. The first is the behaviouralist one. So some might have heard of theorists like Skinner and Pavlov. Behaviouralist is very much a more what we might call a traditional way of punishment and reward. The second one is a constructivist approach, which is where we get students to engage in something, and as the word sounds, they build their own knowledge. And then the third one is a social cultural approach, which means scaffolding learning as students learn from the social environment that they're in. So learning is a social thing. And again, while these are theories about learning, they're based on empirical evidence and ideas of experiments and data collected in classrooms across the world, and they all have something to help us do a good job of teaching kids mathematics. So some of you, I'm sure, have seen something called unheard of direct instruction. And this would be considered a behaviourist approach. Direct instruction means we basically tell them what we want them to learn, explicitly teach them, then we get them to practice it, and then we check to see if they've learned what we've taught them. And this is really developed from theories developed in 60 years ago, behaviourist theories from people like Pavlov, who you may have remember experience with Pavlov's dog. Remember, he used to feed him some food and ring the bell, and then the dog would salivate, and then after a while he'd ring the bell and the dog would salivate because he started associating the ringing of the bell with food. Skinner was another one who did experiments on mice and rewarding them for doing the right thing and then punish them if they did the wrong thing. And he learned by that, people learned how to do the right thing. So this is called a behaviouralist approach. It's about the behaviours you want to do. You reward the behaviours you want and you punish the ones you don't. Not quite as simple as that, but in classrooms often you'll see, as you've been on prac, you might have seen when you get pre-packaged programs and instructional materials. So an example would be mathletics. Kids do a set thing. If they get it right, they get something happening exciting on the screen. If they get it wrong, they get turned back to do it again. And in this model, which is commonly used across schools, this is just one example. But what would happen is you'd teach them something, usually from the front with some instruction. You'd then get them to practice it, or you do something together and then they'd practice, and then you'd test to see if they'd learned what you just taught them. Some of you might have seen I do, you do, I do, we do, you do, that sort of thing. That tends to be built on this thing about direct instruction. And there's an example there if you want to follow that video link later up. But the advantage of this approach is the strength of it is it's really teacher directed. You can really control what you want students to do. It keeps it very tight to what's meant to be learned, and you can model it. It's very easy to evaluate because you want to only ask them about whether they've learned what I've taught you and if they can do what you've taught them. We don't care if they've learned anything else. So IRE format is what it means is I ask a question, you respond, and I evaluate. I inquire, response, evaluate. And you'll see this commonly in classrooms. So I'll say, what's 7 times 4? Some student will go 28, I'll go correct. What's 8 times 6? Some student will say 40, I'll say incorrect. So that's the process of what is called direct instruction and through guided practices. The strength of it is if you really want them to learn something very specific, then this is the quickest way to do it. But the weakness of it is it really lacks diversity. It doesn't have any diversity of ways of thinking about it or ways of solving the problem. It's very focused on one particular way of doing it. It's not very engaging for the students. It tends to teach them that maths is boring and just about content knowledge, and you either know it or you don't. It's difficult to differentiate for a range of students, and there's no differentiation in the teaching. It's just always the same. And in the end, it's really inconsistent with what mathematics is about. So when you're doing mathematics, it's largely not about doing those things. It's about solving problems. But if, for example, you were learning something quite specific, then this is a way of doing it. And you might use it from time to time. If I had my child in school and they were getting some direct instruction, I would think it's okay as a small part of a mathematics program. If they were only getting direct instruction, then I would be worried about the nature of mathematics they're learning, all the other things they're learning about mathematics, and their ability to do things like problem solving and to reason mathematically. So, but it's not without its strengths. So the second sort of learning, and we've only selected 3, there's lots of others as well. But you may have heard of a theorist called Piaget, and Piaget did some work a long time ago, 80 years ago, and it's been developed further particularly by some maths educators, and it's called constructivism. And what it does is it means that students and learners develop their own knowledge. They construct their own knowledge through interacting with their environment and manipulatives and things like that, and others around them. It's a personal thing. It's learned through the use of concrete, and this is where we promote concrete materials and things like that. And concept development is interpreted in terms a way of constructing some sort of picture or image in your mind that you can then repeat. So it's not like direct instruction where I can take something and put it directly in your head. As a teacher, I need to create conditions so you can then make that same thing in your head, that bit of knowledge or that idea or that concept. So in the early primary years, and I wish right through primary years, this is why we might use a lot of concrete materials to show things, to develop things, and help kids build a mental model of what it is. And again, here's another example of it. You can follow up and watch. The strengths of this approach is it really helps students interact with the things around them. and develop their own understanding of things. It's a sense of they own this knowledge. It's not something they've just been given. And they can also start from where they're at. So where their knowledge is, what they already understand, you build on from something else. Constructivism sounds like a building metaphor. What we always want to do is build on from where the student is already at. And not just in terms of their knowledge, but their interests and things as well. And it caters for a diverse range of students. The weakness of it, of course, is you can't assume that they're all going to develop the same conceptual idea in their head. You might put the same materials in front of them and two students might develop different ideas. So you have to be careful about students developing misconceptions from some practical things. So for example, if you were doing a 2-digit addition and the answers were, and they always added up, so you could just add up the digits and get the answer down. So if you had 23 plus 35, you'd get 58, because 3 and 5 is 8 and 2 and 3 is 5. If only examples they had were like that, then the student could build the conceptual idea that you just add up the numbers and put it down. And then when you give them 29 and 32, they might put down 50, 11, because that would be a reasonable construction to make from the experience you had. So you need to make sure you are careful about those experiences you provide. And that's a real challenge sometimes for the teacher, because you can't think in the ways that some of the kids might think. The second thing is it tends to be much more time consuming than direct instruction. Direct instruction, you tell them, they practice it, and then they tell you back. Here you need to allow time for them to think and learn and try and understand it for themselves. It also draws on students' prerequisite knowledge, and sometimes that might not be accurate, or it might be all over the place and it might not help. So for example, one of the terms we use in high school mathematics is the word domain, and it means something. But in regular language, it means something else. So when you talk to the students about the domain, their prerequisite knowledge could send them off on a different tangent and lead them astray. And the last thing is it just requires a lot more of you as a teacher. You can't plan exactly what's going to happen, because you can plan some experiences for the kids, but then you have to be responsive to what they say and do as they're going along. So it requires a lot more of you as a teacher. So the third one is called social constructionism, or socioculturalism is another way of putting it. It's about the idea that learning is social, and teaching and learning is always a social experience. And what they learn is not just about what's in their head, but also what's around them. So what we learn is not just something we know for ourselves, but something that might be shared amongst us. And you notice this when we get shared ideas about things. If you go and watch a rugby game or a rugby league game, when you go there, everyone sort of knows how to behave, even though no one's told them how to do it. It's something that's a shared knowledge amongst us. And so what happens is people learn things in social groups and then they slowly internalize it themselves. And again, here's another video for you to help you look at it. But the strength of this approach in teaching mathematics is that learning drives development. It's about what they're learning collectively, and that helps them develop individually. There's a term there called ZPD, which you'll see on the video, which means zone of proximal development. And what that refers to is students can learn things that are in their zone of proximal development. So if they already understand some sort of concept here, they can learn something that's within their zone of proximal development, but they can't learn something that's too far out. And so as a teacher, your job is to try and keep providing experiences and that are within that zone, so they continue to develop from where they are. And it uses their existing knowledge in things. It's differentiated because each student starts where they are, but there's a collective sense of knowledge as well. What are the weaknesses of this approach? Well, it takes a lot more time than direct instruction again. Classrooms are noisy because, pardon me, we're having classroom interactions between the students. You can't have social learning if the students aren't interacting. So it can be noisy, and that really bothers some people. And it moves movement from the concrete materials to the abstract and back and forth. So you need to have a lot of stuff in the classroom so the kids can depending on where they're at, move back, and if they're struggling, they can go forward or back along that continuum. And again, it always needs you to, as a teacher, to encourage students to participate and engage what's going on. You then have to help them draw out that knowledge so that from that social context, they then draw out the things you want them to learn. So which approach should you use? Well, the answer to that is it depends. We've outlined 3 things here. There's other things which are all variants on that. But which approach are you most comfortable with? Which do you think works best for the kids? What helps the students learn best, which is probably the most important question. And the answer to these is really, we don't know. You'll have to make up your mind. But if you're just doing one approach all the time, it's unlikely to be successful. You might need to use a bit of everything, and you need to help the students come along the way. That's why we have these approaches for you to choose from. We're not giving you here a recipe of how to teach mathematics. You have to decide for yourself, pardon me, in your school site. And we're confident that you'll engage with these things, really think about it, think about your learners, think about your own style, think about how kids learn, and you'll be able to work it out. And what you decide today will hopefully keep developing and growing and changing tomorrow and next year, and as you start your career and through your 50 years till retirement. All right, thanks for watching. I'll be back with the second part of this week's video soon. All the best.